I'm Kelsey Nelson, and I serve as the Senior Manager of External Relations here at Learning Heroes. At a time when headlines often pit parents and educators against each other, the research we're releasing today tells a more nuanced and hopeful story of how increased engagement and strong agreement demonstrate a desire for more robust family-school partnerships. Again, more robust family-school partnerships. Learning Heroes' 6th annual national survey, Parents 2021, going beyond the headlines, dives deeply into the beliefs and the perceptions of parents, teachers, and for the very first time, principals. We're so glad you all are here to be a part of this conversation, and we hope you'll engage with us. As a reminder, please use the chat box, as this is a conversation to share your thoughts and reflections about this data and what implications it may have for your own work. That being said, I'm sure many of you have seen some of the latest headlines discussing parents and educator relationships in a pandemic year, which we are still in, unfortunately, but hopefully soon. There is light at the end of the tunnel. To get some ideas flowing, I'd like to ask you all a question, so please share your thoughts. What narrative or media headlines come to mind for you when you think of family-educator interactions after an intense year of disrupted learning? So I'll say it one more time, and we also have it in the chat box, but what narrative or media headlines come to mind for you when you think of family-educator interactions after an intense year disrupted learning? So what are some of the headlines that you've been reading in the media, maybe hard paper, in the newspaper, or on social media? What's coming to your email inbox? If we can put some of those into the chat box, that would be awesome. I'll give you guys just a couple minutes to do it. We are getting some in. I see Dorothy sharing teachers leaving the profession. That is a huge one that's come up. Mental health concerns for students. Yes. Learning loss. I'm pretty much seeing that every day on the news. Arguments about masking. Yes. Sadly, CRT. Yes. So many different things. Parent burden, SEL. Thank you all for continuing to chime in. Just some of those headlines that you're constantly seeing in the media today. I'd love for you all to input into the chat. And thank you all so much for chiming in. As you guys can see, and I've read some of them, there's been lots of headlines surrounding parent-teacher relationships, though they haven't always been positive. I'm sure you guys are seeing that in the headline, just a negative connotation vibe. Not always positive, but we do know there are some positive things occurring. Now, as the chat box starts to light up, I'd like to also acknowledge our longtime partners in this annual research. First off, the National PTA. Secondly, the National Urban League, Unidos US, and Univision. I would also like to thank our funding partners who are also amazing thought partners in this work. So thanks again so much to all of our great partners. We could not do this without you. And thank you all again for chiming in the chat box. Will we have enough teachers? Another headline, a big divide between parents and teachers. I see why you guys are all here today. You're obviously all involved in the media and seeing what's happening in the media. But today we're presenting to you all the research behind it all. So again, thank you so much. And once again, thanks to all of our great partners featured on this board. Again, we could not do it without you all. All right, with that being said, I'd like to start now and welcome up two very special guests to join me. Now I would like to introduce Ambika Kapur. She's a program officer of national programs for the Carnegie Corporation of New York, as well as Bibb Hubbard, the founder and president of Learning Heroes. Welcome, ladies. How are you?
Hey there. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Great to see you, Bibb, and great to see you, Ambika. Thank you both so much for taking time out. Ambika, I'm going to start with you, and thanks so much again for joining us. The Carnegie Corporation of New York has been a leader in helping build a shared understanding of what happens to happen to ensure that all children can excel. In fact, you are focused on collaborations between families and educators before many people were even talking about it. Ambika, how does this research fit within your vision, and what difference does it make for the field?
Thanks, Kelsey, and hello, everyone. As Kelsey introduced me, I lead our foundation's work in family engagement and education, and what we called public understanding, which involves fostering collaboration among everyone who has a stake in student success. So that's parents, educators, students, and community leaders. We believe that when parents are empowered as true partners in their children's education, students thrive, schools are stronger, and the whole community benefits. And that's why we partner with Learning Heroes annually. This is the 6th time, I believe, to do this research, to listen to parents' needs and aspirations for their children. And this listening and this research we believe is essential, as it can help inform families and schools and how they can help in the learning progress of their children. These insights are helpful for organizations, not just organizations like Learning Heroes, but others in the field, even schools and districts and funders, as we support and design programs to develop the capacity of key actors and organizations in the family engagement field. I think by starting with that listening and designing programs that connect families and schools, I think that's sort of an essential part, and that's why this research is so important.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that great answer, Ambika. And not that anyone has a crystal ball, especially these days, though I'm pretty sure all of us out there wish we did have one to know the future. But if you did happen to have one, Ambika, what do you see in terms of the future of family school partnerships?
Oh, I wish I did have a crystal ball. I want this pandemic to be over, but we've learned a lot during this time. So I think I'll start by saying that we all know that partnerships between schools and families have been long recognized as beneficial for children. Research has shown that parents' involvement in their children's learning has a greater impact on student test scores, than parents' education level or socioeconomic status, and that family engagement efforts can increase children's attendance and academic achievement. But despite this, family engagement strategies have not been sort of widely adopted by schools and districts. But during this past, now I hate to say almost 2 years. The pandemic, I guess schools shut down in March last year. But this issue has sort of taken on, around family engagement, has sort of taken on a renewed urgency. And for all the reasons, all the headlines that you guys wrote in on the chat, despite all the heroic efforts that by many parents and teachers, the impact on students has been hard. But despite all this, there's been a silver lining, I'd like to say, to this crisis. I think we've finally broken down the boundary between home and school. And because this boundary has sort of been broken down, I think that we are beginning to see, and that's what I sort of hope the field sees too, that there's a developing shared understanding among parents and teachers and how they can support their children. So I believe the time is now that we need to support efforts to bridge this gap between home and school, and support teachers and families to partner on student success. And I hope that the field sees this as an important priority, given that there's this renewed urgency. So that's what I see coming down in the next few years.
We're hoping that crystal ball of yours comes true, Ambika. Thank you so much, and giving us some positivity that there is a silver lining. Thanks again so much, Ambika. And in a minute, we're going to take a deep dive into the compelling findings from Parents 2021. But before we do, I now want to turn to Bibb Hubbard. Bibb, Learning Heroes has now been conducting this research for 6 years now, as Ambika alluded to. But building on the data set collected, what were the primary learning goals for this year's research, and what were the insights?
Yeah, so as you said, every year we kind of dig more deeply into parents and educators' mindsets, perceptions, and importantly, actions when it comes to their children's education. And so after a year and a half of unprecedented education disruption, we actually wanted to sort of take flip the negativity on its head and take a step back to say what actually worked. And Dr. Karen Mapp actually gave us this idea pre-COVID, how can we learn from the best of what's happening out there in the family engagement space? So we sort of lifted from that concept and spent quite a bit of time qualitatively listening to parents and teachers over the past year, and then handpicking some principals who do this work exceptionally well. So that is how we designed this survey, to understand, again, sort of through this shared experience that these parents, teachers, and principals went through, what are the lessons that we learned? What should we take away? What worked? How do we move forward instead of backwards? So, and the findings, as you guys will find out, are fascinating, which kind of leads me to some of the big takeaways. that want to sort of plant the seed in everyone's heads as we dive into the data, because really eager, again, Kelsey, you've been great about getting people to in the chat. Please give us your observations, thoughts, wonderings, questions. We'd love to get pushed by all different perspectives, and there's so many phenomenal people on today's call, as you've seen. So for us, some of the big things that stood out is, number one, parents want the truth. When we asked what was most important about that communications between schools and homes, the top priorities for parents, getting a clear and accurate picture of what my child's achievement, and then also having direct, truthful information about how my child is doing, regardless of how difficult that may be. So that was pretty inspiring for us. But similarly, when we asked educators, their priorities were in line. So we're super encouraged by that. Teachers and principals also prioritize that clear and accurate picture and building trust with families. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yet when we look at the data point that has been our North Star for the past 6 years, which is that 9 out of 10 parents, regardless of race, income, or education level, believe that their child is at or above grade level in both reading and math, which we think sort of answers a lot of questions about why families take certain actions. And as Ambika was saying, we've seen the evidence when families take actions in certain ways, students do better. But if parents have this gap and inflated reality of how their children are perceiving, we believe that is a huge issue, an equity issue, if you will. Especially when you consider this year we asked teachers what percentage of children are going to show up prepared for grade level work. 44% of teachers said most of their students will be prepared for grade level work. And if you look at the NAEP data, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that lines up with what teachers. So for us, all of this says, how do we move forward? How do we help meet the priorities of parents, teachers, and principals, and do it in a way so that parents know what teachers know, in respectful, culturally responsive ways that bring families and schools together and helping them team up. So we're really encouraged by what we see, and we think there's an important path forward. And as Ambika said, this is a unique opportunity to seize upon. That is, I think, hopefully for all of us on this phone, that is our to-do. It's to move forward on behalf of parents, teachers, and principals and students, and not sort of fall back into the status quo that really wasn't serving most of our families. So with that, I will turn it to the data and be really excited to get everybody's thoughts, perceptions, questions. So thank you so much, Kelsey. Thanks, Ambika.
Thanks again so much. And Bibb, you shared such great insight. Like you said, there is some alignment despite some of the headlines that many are seeing in the media. And I think it's very important to note as we move forward, because I think at the end of the day, we're all on this call because we just want children to succeed, every child to succeed. And it's going to be very important, even more now probably than ever, coming out of a pandemic year. Hopefully there is light at the end of the tunnel with the pandemic. All right. Thank you again so much, Ambika and Bibb. We appreciate your time. And as Bibb said, now to dive into the research and the data, I'd now like to introduce Adam Burns with Edge Research, and later we will hear from family engagement experts Wendy Lopez-Aflitto and Dr. Eyal Bergman from Learning Heroes. Adam, I hope you're ready because we're going to begin with you. So excited to see some of the great data and research that came out of Parents 2021.
Absolutely ready, Kelsey. Thank you so much, and looking forward to diving in the data with all of you. It's been a privilege to collaborate with Learning Heroes in such important work. And we'll start with just a quick nod to methodology. Just giving you a sense of how robust this research was. A survey, almost 1,500 parents and guardians of kids in public school, K to 12, offered in English and Spanish this online survey. And we did oversamples of specific audiences, Black parents, Hispanic parents, and oversamples are just additional survey completes, additional interviews, so that we can dive into those audiences with greater statistical validity and confidence. The data were weighted to be representative of the public school parent population in the US. And also the educator survey, over 300 teachers, 300 principals, again, K-12 public schools. Data from that online survey also weighted to be representative of those specific audiences. You'll note throughout this presentation, we'll flag statistically significant differences with blue and red font showing higher or lower differences compared to other subgroups. And we're going to be showing you changes over time where we have data from these previous surveys that both Bibb and Kelsey mentioned earlier. With that, let's go ahead and dive right into the data. And let's start with, so what's the mindset that parents and educators shared with us that they're bringing into school this year? And we'll start with a lot of the Learning Heroes key performance indicators, items that we've asked over the years to gauge change or lack thereof over time. And we'll begin by saying simply that the pandemic has not impacted the hopes and dreams of parents for their children. We see that 80%, 8 in 10 of parents say it's absolutely essential or very important that their child goes to college. That's up 7 points since 2019. And when we look at race and ethnicity, you see that at the bottom of the screen, the numbers have been very consistent and strong, particularly among Black parents and Hispanic parents. Where we've seen the most increase recently compared to 2019 is among white parents. When we turn to parent confidence about how well their child is going to do in college, we see, again, strong numbers. Another 80% extremely or very confident that their child's going to be well prepared for entrance into and success in college once they graduate from high school. That's a 15-point increase from back in 2019. And if we look again at race and ethnicity, still very strong results across particularly Black and Hispanic parents. And then we see the largest increase among white parents, although increases among Black and Hispanic parents as well since 2019. So as you know, we have teacher data too. We asked teachers a similar question, so how confident are you? And about 50%. So here we see a bit of a difference between the parents and teachers, 50% thinking that most or all of the students at their school will be prepared for college level work when they graduate. And as Bibb already mentioned, we'll see some more differences and disconnects between parents and teachers on a few other measures. So let's take a look at one of those other measures, which is just asking parents how confident they are. They have a clear understanding of how well their child is achieving academically. And now we're closer to 9 and 10, 87% extremely or very confident that they have that clear picture. But when we ask teachers whether the parents or guardians of their students have that clear understanding, it's only 69%. So certainly a difference and a drop compared to the confidence that parents share with us on this measure. Now, as we transition from confidence to reporting your child's levels of performance, this is where we see the results from the North Star that Bibb mentioned earlier, where we see 9 and 10 parents thinking that their children are at or above grade level in both math and reading. Very, very consistent as we compare it to pre-pandemic numbers. But there's an important difference here, an important change, an important movement in the right direction that we need to emphasize. And that is looking at the percentage of parents who think that their children are at grade level. We notice a 6-point increase here in math. We notice a 7-point increase in reading, the reduction mostly coming from those who thought that the kids were above grade level. So movement in the right direction, but still overall very, very high percentages thinking that their child is at or above grade level, compared to, again, that 44% that Bibb shared with us just a few moments ago, saying that most of their students will show up prepared for grade level work this year. So it's important to ask, as we see these numbers, what gives parents and guardians these beliefs. We know from other Learning Heroes research that parents do rely on grades and report cards, those types of things. So we asked, what kind of grades are your kids getting? Consistently, parents are telling us B's or better. 84% saying that their children get mostly B's or better. And when we asked, well, what about last year? How did things look? Well, let's throw on top of that another 1 in 4, 24% saying that their child's grades were even better last year than a typical year. So a lot of this thought that the grades are good. So perhaps that ties into thinking that their child is at or above grade level. Now, of course, we understand this reliance on grades, but the 2021 data also reveals that parents look to other information. They value other data sources to get a sense of how well their children are doing. And the battery you see on the screen here asks, how helpful are these other resources when it comes to understanding how your kids are doing academically? On the screen, you see the percent extremely helpful and the percent very helpful. When we combine those two, we call it the top two box, and that's the total in the white rectangles to the right. And we see that different types of tests, over 7 in 10, parents finding them extremely very helpful. Projects assigned by the teacher, 70% extremely very helpful. But we also see year-end state tests as providing value. We see 62% of parents saying that it's at least very helpful to get those year-end state tests are very helpful when getting that understanding. And that number is actually up from previous years in which we have asked this question. So we have a good sense of parent mindset about their child's education, but what about this school year? Let's start with what parents think is important to keep in mind at the start of the school year. For this battery, for the data you see on this screen, we're now looking at percent top priority. This is top box, highest end of the scale. How important are these options, and what do we see that rises to the top? Safety and security of students and staff, not surprising. 63% of parents say this is a top priority. In this top tier, we also see development of the whole child, academic progress in reading, writing, math, life skills, addressing mental and emotional well-being, mental health, and as well as preparing students for the real world. All of these items, more than 50% of parents are saying that it is a top priority. If we look to the table on the right, we see that parents of color more likely to indicate these items are a top priority compared to white parents. Still high numbers across the board, but definitely parents of color indicating that these are high priorities for them in particular. One other item that I do want to note, if you look at that making progress academically in reading, writing, and math, 56% indicating that that's a top priority. If we go down to the bottom, we see accelerating students' learning given COVID disruptions last year. 40% of parents indicating that's a top priority. So we see a 16-point difference on these items that address academics or perhaps academic needs with different language. Language important here. We'll also see language being important a bit later on as we dive into family engagement. But when we asked in addition to this question, so what really is the top priority if you had to make that forced choice? And we asked that of educators as well to see if we notice any alignment across these audiences, and we absolutely do. Very, very consistent results. We see it's all about safety and security. It's about academics. It's about taking stock of students' mental health, emotional well-being for parents, as well as teachers and principals when asked to identify what really rises to the top in terms of priority. So that's the priority side of the ledger. Let's go to worries. What is keeping parents up at night? We ask, how much do you worry about these as a parent? Again, we're looking at that top two box, worry a lot and worry some. And we'll go directly to the top, and we see three things rising to the top here with 60% or more, worrying a lot, worry some about the child's happiness and emotional well-being, 65%, someone in the family getting COVID, 60%, and your child experiencing stress or anxiety, 63% worrying a lot or worry some. Now, I want to also pay more attention to and emphasize an item that we had never asked before. This was the first time we ever asked this item. Having politicians who are not educators make decisions about what students learn in the classroom, 68% rises to the top of this parent worry list, worrying a lot or worrying some about this specific element. And notice the difference when we look at a bit of a language test that we conducted in the survey, having parents who are not educators make those decisions. 54% worry at least some about that, but certainly nowhere near the level to the concern about politicians. As we look at race and ethnicity, you can see all of the blue numbers in the Hispanic column indicating that Hispanic parents more likely to worry about these items compared to other parents, especially compared to white parents. So when we look at these worries and compare them to educator worries, we still see that it comes down to happiness and health. The COVID concern, very consistent across all of these audiences. Then students' happiness and emotional well-being also resonates pretty highly. And among principals, student safety in the school overall. Now, important to note, we did not ask that politicians who are not educators question on the educator survey. Would have been interesting to get those results, but overall, health and happiness rise to the top when it comes to worries. So we have all of these mindsets providing important context of what parents and teachers and principals are showing up this year with. Let's get to action. Let's delve into this question of what does it mean as we see these audiences taking action this year. And we'll begin with what these audiences find as important when it comes to, for parents, how their child's school attempts to engage or communicate with them. And these are the items Bibb mentioned at the open. They want the clear picture. 55% say that's a top priority. Being direct and truthful, 54%. And teachers and staff following through. When parents have a question, they want follow through. Again, very, very high percentages, most of that clear picture and being truthful. Now for teachers and principals, we asked how important are each of the following when you think about family engagement at school, and we see agreement. We see this idea of that clear picture, absolutely top tier among teachers and principals, but we also see in their top tier responses ways to help facilitate open two-way communications. We see building trust, we see feedback, being authentic, being accountable, all of these items really to reinforce that two-way communications. So with these priorities in mind, it's also important to see how all of these audiences will emphasize family engagement or involvement this year. So we asked, are you going to be to parents? Are you going to be more involved, less involved, or about the same compared to last year? And when it comes to teachers and principals, what about your time and effort on family engagement? We see 4 in 10 parents, just under half of teachers, and just over half of principals saying they're going to do more than last year. And what's even most striking, if we look at more than last year and add that to the same as last year, we have 93% of parents who say they'll be just as involved or more compared to a year when their child was learning at home. So if we keep these intentions in mind, what do the parents more specifically say that we'd likely to do? You see the battery we asked on the screen, looking at, again, top 2 box, very likely and somewhat likely. And we see high percentages for very likely and for somewhat likely. But most notably rising to the top, where over 50% of parents say they'd be very likely to do it this year. More time to talk to my children about their everyday assignments, getting a better understanding of what my child's expected to learn and where my child is academically. These results are even more striking when you compare them to what we learned when we asked this battery last year. And we see these numbers for very likely up over 20, at least 20 points or more for almost every item in this battery. So now let's take a look and compare parent intentions about actions of what they say they're going to be doing, a bit more specific than the ones we see in this battery, and compare them to what educators say it is important for them to do. And what do we see? Folks are on the same page. It's about checking child's progress on assignments, helping with homework, communicating regularly, and participating in parent-teacher conferences. With that, Kelsey, let me pause and hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Adam. I think everything was just so insightful. And please, again, put all of your thoughts and comments in the chat box. We will do questions at the end. I think especially the first time asking the political question to parents was very, very interesting, especially if you live here in the DMV area. I think all of us remembered the recent race in Virginia for governor and how politics in the classroom were something that was brought up between many, many parents. With that being said, I'd now like to introduce Wendy Lopez-Aflitto, my colleague here at Learning Heroes, who is the Vice President of Learning from Learning Heroes. Wendy, how are you? Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining today.
So Wendy, one of the many interesting data points from the research is that the top 2 things parents want from school communications are a clear picture of how their child is achieving academically and being direct and truthful about student performance. That being said, what barriers and opportunities exist related to ensuring that more candid conversations are happening at scale?
Yeah, so for me, this is one of the most telling and actionable pieces of data out of this research. And it comes down to that parents want and deserve the truth, as Adam and Bibb mentioned. And for those of us as parents, that might seem like an obvious, but what we know is that there are still some very real barriers and opportunities, as you mentioned, to moving toward a system that provides that truth at scale for all parents and based on trust. And so I think this is where we can weave in all of what we've learned from the past several years of our research to provide some context. As we all know, teachers have diagnostics and embedded assessments to guide instruction, but we know that it also doesn't trickle down to parents at scale. And what we see in this data is that parents say they really value multiple measures, right, beyond grades. So starting back in 2018, we started digging into this issue specifically and found several concerning addressable root causes, again, that we think is what can lead towards opportunity as we look to supporting teachers around family engagement. So the first is fear. Teachers fear being blamed or not believed by parents, especially if it contradicts what parents say they've seen in the past or in report cards. And I know there was some really good conversation in the chat box around the subjectivity of measures, so would love to dig into that. The second is lack of training and prioritization. So it's not a job expectation, and there's little to no incentives or training that prioritize and equip teachers to communicate multiple measures. The third, and this one really hits home for me as a parent of a second grader, is those untapped existing moments and opportunities. So what we've seen in our research is that while parent-teacher conferences continue to be the #1 way parents and teachers communicate, both of them rate them as low value. And for me, that just, is just so ripe for opportunity for supporting teachers and maximizing that time with parents. And then the fourth, and probably the most concerning, is how we've seen bias pop up in this. And when you see glimpses of both implicit and explicit bias, it really sheds light that, as Bibb said, this really is an equity issue, right? So when you hear, teachers in their out loud voices say things like, well, why would I share that information with those parents if they can't do anything or won't do anything about it? So for us, we're sort of looking at the data through the lens of what we've learned throughout the years and looking at the opportunities here, and why we're so eager to continue to work with partners and get your feedback and your pushes today, because there's opportunity and there's urgency in really looking at moving towards a system that provides the truth that parents want and deserve.
Yes, the opportunity and urgency, I think, is something to continue us in moving forward. The truth shall set us free. I truly believe that's something so powerful for us to go forward with. And it's great to know that that's exactly what parents are requesting and wanting. Thank you so much, Wendy. And now to transition back to Adam, we've talked a lot about agreement and engagement, but we all know that this work isn't easy, all right? I'm sure everyone on this call could agree. But that being said, as Wendy alluded to, there are some barriers. What are some additional findings from this research, Adam?
Great, thanks so much, Kelsey. We'll jump in right now to explore where there's opportunity, really building off of what Wendy spoke to just a moment ago. And we'll start with some agree-disagree statements, where we asked teachers and principals some different statements about family engagement, and we see some interesting results. We'll start at the top of that gray line where we see items about potential and benefits. We're looking at percent strongly agree. So this is, again, that highest response in that 5-point scale. And we note that both principals and teachers see a lot of promise and value with family engagement, particularly the teachers. 54% strongly agreeing that all in the school have a role to play when it comes to family engagement. 51% that it's essential to helping students succeed. Again, principals, high percentages in strong agreement as well, just not to the same extent as teachers. When we look below that gray bar, however, we look at those barriers and limitations, this is where we start to see some differences with principals sharing more agreement with the barriers and limitations than their counterparts who are teachers. And one in particular that I want to bring to our attention, especially given Wendy's comments, is about bias. That second item below the gray bar, more support is needed to help staff members identify and work through biases they may have when trying to communicate with parents. 42% of principals strongly agree with that statement, statistically significantly different and higher from teachers. Now, we asked parents a similar question, and we know that parents share, importantly, a similar sentiment. Again, looking at percent strongly agree, we have 47% of parents agreeing that family engagement is essential to helping students succeed, but I want to focus on what is the top barrier. There's more support needed to help staff members identify and address biases. We have 38% of parents strongly agreeing. They know that that's a problem. It's the top barrier of all those tested. And 44% of Black parents strongly agreeing with that statement, more likely to do so than their counterparts. Now, we asked educators, who's most responsible for family engagement in their school? That's some interesting responses and differences. We look at teachers who are in the green bar, 60%, it's on me. It's on my shoulders here. I have the responsibility, primary responsibility for family engagement. Only 13% of teachers say it's the principal, when you see lower percentages for other roles that were included in the survey. Principals, a little bit more split there. We have just over a third, 34% saying it's their responsibility, but they also see teachers playing a role as well, 29% saying they have the primary responsibility. So we see that these principals and teachers, they see great value in family engagement. They both believe they have a responsibility more than just playing a role, but where do they learn about it? We asked, so what's influenced your approach to family engagement? And if we look at the results here, what rises to the top? It's really informal influences. Other teachers, colleagues you've worked with, you've developed your own approach. Interacting with students' families rises to the top among both audiences. It's top tier. We have to go pretty far down in the battery to get to some more formal assistance or influences where we see professional development, less than a third of teachers or principals indicating that, or professors or college degree program. Now, we also got even more specific than this and asked about structures and supports for family engagement. And I'll focus on the teacher data here, giving a set of, you see them across the almost the middle of the screen, different structures and supports that could be included for family engagement at a school. And the bars represent the percent who teachers who find that extremely helpful. If we add the very helpful on top of that, we certainly get a majority finding all of these helpful quite easily. But let's focus on that percent extremely helpful at that top box. What rises to the top? It's time. Teachers want that time set aside to communicate with families, 45%, as well as getting the translation of those school communication, school materials into a family's native language. Now, we'd like to layer on top of that, well, what's in place? We'll give you the same set of battery, same items in this battery. What do you have in place at your school? And what do we see that's most in place? The technology. Over 7%, 7 in 10 of teachers, 79% say it's the apps, online portals, platform to communicate with families. 73% is those virtual or Zoom options. But what we don't see as much is what rises to the top, especially that set aside regular time. Only 1 in 2 teachers, 51%, just over a majority, say that they have that time set aside, even though that's what they identify to be the most helpful. Now, the data also reveal areas where teachers feel that they might need some support, and Wendy alluded to this as well. We listed 4 ways in which there could be areas where teachers could find some help. And if you look at the screen here, we see a 5-point scale going from very easy on the left, the dark blue, to very difficult, the red on the right. Where I think it's most illustrative to look at these results or look at the answers where people are not saying easy. So they don't say it's very easy, they don't say it's easy. It could be neutral, difficult, or very difficult, but it's at least not easy. If we add up those percentages, establishing strong relationship with families, okay, 43% say it's not easy, perhaps some help there. But for these other items on the screen, a majority of teachers saying communicating difficult information, 52%, that's not easy. We get closer to 2/3 when we talk about reaching families the school hasn't really connected with before. And we get to close to 7 in 10 when it comes to communicating with families whose native language is not English. So we see some areas for support, certainly reinforcing what Wendy presented earlier. And I'd like to also mention a little bit about language, and alluded to this earlier. How should we talk about family engagement? We asked teachers, principals, and parents, what's the way to best represent what we're talking about here with family engagement? Some really interesting results. Among parents, it's about trust and teamwork. And this language was very consistent across all key subgroups, as you see in the text circle to the right. What doesn't work so much? Partnership. And that's across all of these audiences. Partnership does not resonate as highly. And collaboration also seems to fall flat a bit among parents. Perhaps that's a bit too much edu-speak for that audience, certainly something that we try to avoid in education communications. So again, a lot of really interesting information. Kelsey, let me pass it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Adam. Again, just lots of great insight. Again, if you're looking at all of that information, please input your thoughts and comments into the chat box throughout. A very healthy, very good conversation happening there. So thank you all so much for your participation. And now, before we bring everyone back to answer the questions in the chat, I'd like to bring on Eyal into the conversation and ask him to reflect on this last chapter. Eyal, it seems like there is strong alignment in what parents, teachers, and principals prioritize. That being said, there are also some interesting differences when it comes to principals and teachers specifically. What is your take on them, and what opportunities surface for you based on the data?
Yeah, well, to me, the biggest discrepancy we see in the data is on who owns the primary responsibility for this work and where we get our training. And what we see is that there are really wide differences between teachers and principals on whose job it is to do family engagement. And as Adam alluded, teachers are far more likely to rate informal sources as where they learn to do this work. And I think it can be tempting to see this as a challenge and to try to go after this challenge, and we should, but I actually see this as a symptom of a much deeper challenge, which is just a lack of prioritization in our sector for this work. And that's why we see very few formal structures and supports in schools to really elevate family and community engagement as an equity priority and as a core priority for teaching and learning. And so we don't really see many really robust ways for folks to learn how to do this work, or actually unlearn ineffective means of doing this work. So, teachers are saying they want more time to do this work, but another thing that we uncover is that there's a big discrepancy that we see that principals are actually far more likely to say that it's unrealistic to ask teachers to spend time on family engagement than teachers are. So teachers are saying they want more time. We see that in the data. They want more time to dedicate to family engagement. They say this work is really important, but they also say this work isn't very easy. And so the truth is, if we don't have time or structures to be in community with each other, then we don't get to know each other. And maybe that's why we see so many focusing on bias as one of the top barriers or the top barrier to effective work. So when we try to bring it all together, I think it just speaks to the important need for family engagement strategies that focus on staff support and development, not just family-facing support and development. And that this should be tied to our equity goals and driven through a lens of solidarity and deeper relationships, which we also see reflected in the data.
Equity goals, solidarity, and deeper relationships. So many important takeaways, again, especially as we move forward. And as we know on this call, again, family engagement is so important if you need to connect with students in your classroom, their parents, and the overall community. Thank you so much, Eyal. And on that note, let's bring everyone back. So we'll get everyone back with us. And again, this is the time to please, if you have any last minute questions, please and put them into the chat, because we're soon going to open it up for your questions. And we are already getting some really, really good ones. Again, just putting your questions in, giving everybody just a couple more minutes. Adam, Bibb, and Eyal, I hope you guys have seen the chat boxes buzzing. So many great questions from all of this great data that you all have took so much great time on, which is very exciting to hear. And again, thank you all so much for participating in today's webinar, but it's not over yet. We do want to make sure that we get the questions answered. And with that said, since we want to be mindful of everyone's time, the first question, Bibb, is directed towards you. The first question is wondering why the uptick in parental confidence. It seems counterintuitive given the loss of instructional time and the documented lower levels of achievement based on preliminary data. And this question comes from Lucas, who is attending our call today.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously one that we had to sort of hit pause on and reflect. And parents last year had more opportunities to see their children learn, see what kind of learner they were. So we were sort of surprised by that as well, except for when you think about the measures that they were given access to. So parents had to rely even more on report card grades as sort of the sole indicator. So for us, parents were sort of wired to put all of their eggs in that report card basket to begin with, because most parents don't know that good grades don't necessarily equal grade level mastery. And so we also heard 24% of parents reported their children got higher grades last year than they had traditionally. So I think for us, it points to that parents just had that one measure to rely on. And again, going back to Adam's slide about what measures would be helpful, parents are eager to get lots of different kinds of information. Even state test scores at 62% is a pretty big number for helpful. So I think, parents want the clear picture. They want to understand what's expected of their child. Yet they're having to rely just on those report card grades. So trying to get parents more information in a more timely, actionable way is something that obviously we're eager to help support and make sure it happens.
Yes, more information in a timely, actionable, very important word way. Super, super key. Thank you so much, Bibb. All right, let me go to question 2 now. And again, everyone, thank you so much for putting these in. Eyal, this next one is for you. Where can we look for best practices in this work, as well as experts in the space, both nationally and across the country?
Sure. I think it's really helpful when you're looking at school systems, school districts that are really meaningfully investing in this work, is to follow the dollars and follow the people in a way. So there are a number of school districts that have cabinet level leaders that are wholly dedicated to family and community engagement. This is not a position like every school district has a chief academic officer, every school district has a chief business officer, every school district has a chief human resources officer. Not every school district has a chief family engagement officer. So I look at districts like Boston Public Schools, Richmond Public Schools, Philadelphia has invested as well, Baltimore City Public Schools. These are places where the lead family engagement person sits on the cabinet and works directly with those other cabinet leaders. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that trickles down into the classroom is always going to be perfect and good, but it does give you an indication about where the strategy and where the resources are coming from. And I think that that's a helpful place to look. And then the other question was around experts. I mean, there are plenty of experts. I think that there's a lot of experts just on the ground, like parent organizing groups, like the local community groups that are listening to parents are probably going to be the best experts to listen to. I mean, there are books you can read. Of course, Dr. Karen Mapp is a name that comes up a lot. But there's a lot of scholarship and a lot of research, but when it really comes down to who is the expert on how to work with families, I think the answer is mostly families.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eyal. Like you said, if you want to talk to families, it's best to hear directly from families and those people on the ground. As you said, talking to the parent leaders and so many others that help this work move forward. Let me move now to question 3. And again, everyone, I please want to invite you to keep sending your questions in. We are trying to record all of them. Adam, this next one is for you. What are any key takeaways as they relate to parents who have kids in after school or OST programs?
So actually, Bibb, this might be a good question for you as well. We had a couple of slides where it illustrated how parents who say they intended to enroll their kids in OST programs were more likely to be involved. They were more likely to up their involvement compared to previous years. So certainly very, very encouraging results. But I know, Bibb, that you worked with some of my colleagues for a more robust study in terms of the potential impacts of OST. So I don't know if there's anything that you'd want to add on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, so we fielded in February of 2021 a very large survey of parents, teachers, and OST providers out of school time, extracurricular. And we found that the parents who had enrolled their children in a program had much higher confidence levels about higher expectations for their children, higher confidence levels about where their children are, were more engaged, were taking more actions. Like these parents, and I guess it's maybe not surprisingly, but there were significant differences, statistically speaking, between parents who had enrolled their children in an extracurricular activity and those parents who hadn't. And when we drilled down to ask the parents who hadn't enrolled, we did some follow-up qualitative. It wasn't for lack of wanting to, it was for lack of financial capacity, transportation, and high quality programming that was just, in proximity to where they lived. So for me, the takeaway is these extracurricular activities played sort of a really meaningful role in children's lives. And I think it's another part of this broader puzzle. When we talk about family engagement, it's not just binary between schools and homes, although that's a lot what we default to, but there's this other, it's wherever that child is learning and growing and developing that I think is important, that we need to sort of pull back and look towards, so that we can be supporting that child wherever they are. And those parents who do send their children to these extracurricular activities continue to show in this data as well, higher levels of involvement. And so it was just sort of, it's been an interesting through line for us. And I think something for all of us to consider.
Thank you so much, Bibb. Great to hear, especially as someone who was a child that participated in so many extracurriculars and after schools programs. So thanks, Mom and Dad, again, so much for everything. Exactly. All right, that being said, let me transition to question number 4. This one is for Bibb, Wendy, and Eyal. Anyone can chime in first, but what are some opportunities to bridge the gap between principals and teachers based on what was presented?
Yeah, Wendy, you guys want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I'll build on what Eyal started talking about in terms of, we learn by doing, right? And so really creating the priority and breaking down once we create the priority, like the how, right? So really looking at maximizing time that exists. And this is a small example that we talk a lot about, but like supporting principals and how to maximize staff time, to your good question. And, Lucas in the chat box and others, like, is this realistic, especially in this world we're living in with, very significant staff shortages, which is very real. I know we're experiencing it in our district here in New Jersey. But looking at staff time, for example, can you give streamline agendas so that you give 15 minutes back at every meeting so that teachers have the time? And that speaks to the priority. It's coming down, giving time so that teachers can, role play together, what these conversations look like, really maximizing PLCs. And so, yeah, I'll pause there. But I think for me, that's where my head goes, is like, what's the how?
I mean, my head goes to, I worked in a school district for years. I created a new family engagement department. It's not that schools and districts don't have priorities that they deploy their structures and resources to support. So I just, as an example, like if a school district, eventually every school district buys a new math curriculum and they have to adopt the curriculum and have all their teachers trained on it. And so the process goes through a process for purchasing a curriculum, training their coaches and their staff on it, getting those staff into schools, and then math teachers and elementary teachers are learning how to use the curriculum. They're using their collaboration time to iterate on it and really start to understand it and see how it reflects in their practice. I mean, it's just a matter of time and treasure dedicated to learning how to do something new. And so there's always time and interest and funding for top priorities. So if family engagement is a top priority, we can deploy those same resources. We can have family engagement coaches that go out to schools and then have dedicated time for teams to be thinking about their practices and trying new strategies and iterating on them over time. And I think that helps to get to a common language and a common understanding so that we can improve our practice over time.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that question, both Wendy and Eyal. And Eyal, this next one is for you. How many colleges and universities actually provide teaching candidates any type of, quote, development in parent or family engagement space? And this one's from Barb. Barb, thanks again so much for being on this call.
That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that question. My understanding is that I think that there's something like 13 states that require family engagement as a credentialing component to teacher certification. A good resource for this is the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement, or NAFSCE. They were working on how to systematize and promote family engagement as a teacher credentialing requirement in states across the country. They have a working group working on that. So that might be probably the best place to learn more specifics on it. But we do know that it is a challenge and it's a problem. And we hear from teachers and principals all over the country that it's just not been something that they have been exposed to in their own training and credentialing. And then it's also not really addressed in their induction once they've become teachers in their districts. And that's why we see in the data that the most common way that folks have learned about this is through the informal sources. It's the teacher that works next door to them. It is their department head. It is different folks that they're just in contact with on a regular basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eyal. And again, I encourage everyone to also look in the chat. We're getting some great examples. I know Mona shared looking at One City Schools in Madison, Wisconsin for prioritizing family engagement. We also are here in Colorado requires training in family engagement for teacher prep. So please also, if you have any other resources or examples like that, please also share them in the chat as we are all learning together on this webinar. All right, the next question anyone can answer. The question is, sad to see that so few teachers and principals strongly agree that parent engagement is essential for student achievement. Is there any data that dispels that belief and draws a direct correlation? And this question is from Sarah. Sarah, thanks again for being on this webinar.
Can you restate that question, Kelsey?
Sure.
I don't think I heard it correctly. Sorry.
No problem. Sad to see that so few teachers and principals strongly agree that parent engagement is essential for student achievement. Is there any data that dispels that belief and draws a direct correlation? That's the question from Sarah.
So I felt like, and Adam, this is a question for you, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I thought that they had, for the top box, it was a pretty strong number for family engagement is essential relative to some of the other ones. Again, this was the top box numbers, which are typically really small. And I felt like these were pretty robust, but maybe that wasn't, I mean, I'd be curious for your read on that.
That's right. And I think it's important to think about that context of percent strongly agree. Even though teachers were more at 50%, principals weren't necessarily there, but it was among the highest of what we saw among principals. But perhaps the spirit of the question is about would be great if the teacher numbers were higher or the principal numbers were even higher.
Right.
I don't know that I could speak to or think about another data point or a study that directly draws that correlation. Maybe Al, in your research and studies, you have seen that. But that's at least my take in terms of the interpretation of the question.
Awesome, thank you. And we do have one more that I do want to get to, and this one is for you, Ambika. The question is from Lucas. Would this be the time to share the evidence that Ambika referred to linking parental engagement and student achievement? Not sure that this is as widely known as it might and should be. Also, perhaps, is there an opportunity to surface efficient models for parental engagement?
Thanks, Kelsey. Feel free to jump in here too. I mean, from the data that we have seen from the research done by, starting with Dr. Karen Mapp, but also with many of our, more recently, with many of our grantees working in the field. Dr. Peter Bergman at Columbia University, at Teachers College, has done some work around attendance and family engagement. He's done some RCTs that actually have shown that when families are engaged, children, especially middle and high school children, they attended, school more, and of course, did better at school too. We have grantees, other grantees like Power My Learning that have done work around connecting families and schools around student learning, around ELA and math, and has also shown when parents are engaged, you see greater student achievement. There are many examples of evidence-based practices that show this connection. And of course, from the research perspective, the Harvard Family Research Project, Dr. Heather Weiss had done some work around this. So there are evidence that we turn to when we sort of make that connection. And the second part of the question was about, are there examples of effective family engagement practices?
Correct, yes.
There are many across the country that are doing very good work. We, in fact, just released from a national funder, we released an RFP where we wanted to sort of hear from local organizations that are doing very good work, partnering with schools. And we have been pleasantly surprised. There are organizations partnering in Chicago around high quality instruction materials. materials, working with teachers and families to connect around ELA, math, and science. We partner with nonprofits like Talking Points that connects families and teachers. There's a two-way communication in about 150 languages. So you have better communication leading to greater student achievement because your parents and teachers can connect on a shared goal. We partner with organizations like another organization called Ed Navigator that helps families navigate the school system so they can make informed choices about how their schools are doing and take the right decisions for their kids. So there are many, many examples out there of organizations that are doing very good work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ambika, for sharing those great examples. And that will do it for today's webinar. I do want to thank you all so much